Millionaire signs a contract blindly and loses 4.3B, bankrupting his company, until a little orphan girl makes a shocking proposal and leaves him pale. Before we dive into this moving story of sadness and isolation, drop a comment with your location and subscribe for more emotional content. The pen felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in Marcus Wellington's trembling hand. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the Arctic air conditioning in his corner office, 45 floors above Manhattan's bustling streets. The contract spread across his mahogany desk might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics, pages and pages of legal jargon that blurred together in his exhausted mind. "Just sign here, Mr. Wellington," the lead attorney from Blackstone Industries said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. He tapped a manicured finger on the signature line, his cold smile promising riches beyond imagination. $4.3 billion for your AI technology patents, the biggest tech acquisition in American history. Marcus's empire, Wellington Technologies, had taken him 23 grueling years to build from absolutely nothing. He still remembered sleeping in his beat-up Honda Civic as a broke college dropout, surviving on ramen noodles and sheer determination. From that lowest point to commanding a fortune that put him in the top 50 richest Americans, every step had been earned through blood, sweat, and 18-hour workdays. But now the vultures were circling with predatory patience. Competitors had systematically stolen his best engineers with offers he couldn't match. Major investors were pulling out faster than rats abandoning a sinking ship, spooked by mysterious rumors about Wellington Technologies' financial stability. The board of directors, led by his former friend Richard Ashworth, had been pressuring him for months to consider a buyout before the company collapsed entirely. "I need more time to review these terms with my legal team," Marcus said, his voice hoarse from 3 days of non-stop negotiations. The contract was massive, nearly 900 pages of dense legal language that would take weeks to properly analyze. "The offer expires at midnight," another lawyer interrupted smoothly, checking his Rolex with theatrical precision. "Blackstone won't wait, Mr. Wellington. Market conditions are volatile. Sign now or lose everything anyway when your company files for bankruptcy next month." The clock on Marcus's wall ticked like a time bomb, counting down to his doom. 11:47 p.m., 13 minutes to make the biggest decision of his life. He thought about his ex-wife Patricia, who'd divorced him 2 years ago after 20 years of marriage, claiming he loved his company more than his family. She'd taken half his assets and their 15-year-old daughter Sophia to London, leaving him alone with his empire and his regrets. He thought about the 300 loyal employees who'd lose their jobs if Wellington Technologies went under. Good people with families, mortgages, dreams that depended on his leadership. He thought about the revolutionary AI technology they'd developed, innovations that could change the world but might die with his company's collapse. The lawyers sat in predatory silence, their shark-like smiles never wavering. They knew exactly what pressure points to push, exactly how desperate he'd become. Marcus had built Wellington Technologies on his ability to read people, to see through deception and manipulation. But exhaustion and desperation had clouded his judgment, made him vulnerable to exactly the kind of corporate warfare he'd once excelled at detecting. At 11:59 p.m., with his empire crumbling around him and nowhere else to turn, Marcus Wellington signed his name with a flourish that felt like signing his own death warrant. The lawyers smiled like sharks who'd just smelled blood in the water. They gathered the contracts quickly, professionally, efficiently, a well-rehearsed dance of corporate predation. Within minutes, Marcus was alone in his corner office with nothing but a company credit card that would be cancelled by morning, and the sinking realization that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. His phone buzzed with an incoming text. A message from his personal attorney, David Chen. "Marcus, do not sign anything from Blackstone under any circumstances." Found the buried clause on page 847. They're not just taking your patents, they're taking everything. Your name, your technology, your right to compete. Call me immediately, no matter what time you get this. Marcus stared at the message timestamp, 12:01 a.m., 1 minute too late. His hands shook as the full implications crashed over him like a tsunami of realization. Tomorrow morning, he'd discover that Blackstone's contract contained hidden provisions that stripped him of not just his patents, but his right to work in technology for the next 20 years. They'd played him perfectly, using his desperation and his love for his employees against him like a weapon. By dawn, Marcus Wellington, once worth $4.3 billion, would be broke, blacklisted and utterly broken. But he didn't know that yet. Right now, he was just a man who'd bet everything on what he desperately hoped was salvation, but feared might be his destruction. The city lights twinkled below him like fallen stars, beautiful and impossibly distant. Soon, he'd be down there among them. Just another broken dreamer in a city full of shattered ambitions. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in Tony's Pizza Palace on 47th Street, a grease-stained establishment that was about as far from his former five-star restaurants as a man could fall without hitting rock bottom. The slice of pepperoni pizza before him had cost $2.50, more than he could comfortably afford from his rapidly dwindling resources. His custom-tailored Armani suits had been replaced by clothes from Goodwill that hung awkwardly on his frame, and his penthouse apartment with its breathtaking city views was now a cramped one-room studio in Queens, with a radiator that clanged like a ghost in chains all through the night. The Blackstone contract had been a masterpiece of corporate warfare, a perfectly orchestrated destruction that Sun Tzu himself would have admired. Not only had they acquired his patents for a fraction of their true worth, but they'd systematically destroyed his reputation with surgical precision. Within hours of the contract signing, leaked internal documents had surfaced, suggesting that Marcus had been embezzling from his own company for years. Financial records that seemed damning appeared in the hands of business journalists. Former employees came forward with carefully crafted stories of workplace misconduct and financial irregularities. It was character assassination performed by masters of the craft. Within days, every door in Silicon Valley had slammed shut with thunderous finality. Former allies crossed the street to avoid being seen with him. Investors who'd once competed for his attention now treated his phone calls like radioactive waste. The tech industry had rendered its verdict. Marcus Wellington was persona non grata. His bank accounts had been frozen pending a federal investigation that could drag on for years. His assets were tied up in litigation that would cost millions he no longer possessed. The only money he had access to was the $300 in cash from his wallet, his emergency fund that had never been intended for an emergency this catastrophic. Marcus picked at the congealed cheese on his pizza crust, remembering when he'd casually spent more on a single bottle of wine than he now had to live on for a week. The irony cut deep. He'd once donated more to charity in a single afternoon than his current net worth. Now he was counting quarters like a man who'd never seen prosperity, let alone commanded billions. The restaurant around him buzzed with the conversations of working-class New Yorkers grabbing quick meals between shifts, construction workers in paint-stained coveralls, taxi drivers taking quick breaks, retail workers stretching their lunch dollars. These were people who understood struggle in ways his former billionaire peers never could. There was an honesty in their exhaustion that Marcus found both humbling and strangely comforting. The bell above the restaurant door chimed with a cheerful sound that seemed out of place in his current reality. A small figure entered, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair braided with careful precision and clothes that had clearly seen better days but were meticulously clean. She looked around the restaurant with nervous energy before her intelligent eyes settled on his table, specifically on the half-eaten pizza slice and the untouched garlic bread he'd been too nauseous to finish. She approached his table with careful steps, clutching a small purse that appeared to be handmade from colorful fabric scraps. Her shoes were held together with carefully applied tape, but they were spotless, Poor but proud, Marcus recognized the combination because he'd lived it himself decades ago. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice was soft but remarkably clear, carrying a slight Hispanic accent that added music to her words. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I was wondering, could I maybe have the rest of your food? It's for my mama, and I can pay you for it." Marcus looked up at her properly for the first time, really seeing her. She was thin, too thin for a growing child, but her posture was straight and her gaze direct. There was an intelligence in her dark eyes that seemed far older than her chronological years, a sharpness that reminded him of himself at his most focused. This wasn't a child begging. This was someone making a business proposition. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently, his voice rusty from lack of use. "Emma Rodriguez, sir. My mama is working really late again tonight, cleaning houses for people in Manhattan, and she hasn't had anything to eat today." The girl's chin jutted out with defiant pride. "I have 50 cents I can pay you for the food. I know it's not much, but it's what I have." Something in Marcus's chest tightened painfully. He'd been so completely consumed by his own spectacular fall from grace that he'd forgotten there were people in the world who'd never had grace to fall from in the first place. "Keep your 50 cents, sweetheart," Marcus said, sliding the plate across the table toward Emma with gentle care. "Take whatever you want. Take it all." Emma's eyes widened with surprise, but she didn't immediately grab the food. Instead, she studied Marcus with an intensity that made him distinctly uncomfortable, like she was seeing straight through to his soul. Her gaze took in his expensive but worn clothing, his hollow cheeks, the way his hands shook slightly from stress and too little sleep. "You're not from around here." "Are you?" she said with startling directness. "Your clothes are really expensive brands, but they're getting old now, and you look sad. Really, really sad." Marcus almost smiled despite everything, the first genuine expression of anything resembling happiness he'd felt in 3 weeks. "Is it that obvious?" "My mama cleans houses in the rich parts of Manhattan," Emma explained matter-of-factly, as she carefully wrapped the pizza slice and garlic bread in paper napkins with practiced efficiency. "I go with her sometimes when school's out, and I know what rich people look like when they're pretending not to be rich anymore. You have that same look." The wisdom in that simple observation hit Marcus like a physical blow to the stomach. This 8-year-old girl had just articulated something that 23 years in high-stakes business hadn't taught him, that desperation had its own unmistakable signature. "Your mama sounds like a very intelligent woman," he said quietly. "She's the smartest person I know," Emma replied with fierce pride. "She went to university in Columbia and studied civil engineering before she came here to America. She can design bridges and calculate load-bearing structures and solve mathematical problems that would make your head spin. But her degrees don't count here. So instead, she scrubs toilets for people who aren't half as smart as her." Emma's voice held no bitterness, just the matter-of-fact acceptance of an unfair world that had taught her harsh lessons far too early. "She never complains, though. She just works harder than anyone should have to work, and she tells me that someday things will be better if we're patient and smart about it." Marcus watched as she carefully secured the food in her little handmade purse, noting the way she handled each piece like it was precious cargo. Something nagged at him about this encounter, the way she'd sized him up so quickly. The calculating intelligence in her eyes that reminded him powerfully of his own younger self when he'd been hungry and desperate and determined to claw his way up from nothing. "Emma, can I ask you something?" he said, leaning forward slightly. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" "Rich," she answered immediately, without the slightest hesitation or embarrassment. "Rich enough that my mama never has to scrub another floor or say yes sir and no ma'am to people who treat her like she's completely invisible." "That's a very good goal," Marcus said carefully. "But how exactly do you plan to achieve it?" Emma looked at him like he'd just asked her to explain how breathing worked, like the answer should be completely obvious to anyone with half a brain. "By being smarter than everyone else, obviously. by learning how the game really works, instead of just stumbling around playing it blind. Marcus felt a genuine chill run down his spine. This wasn't the typical answer of an 8-year-old dreaming about being a princess, or a pop star, or a veterinarian. This was the calculated response of someone who had already figured out that life was fundamentally a game with rules heavily rigged in favor of the house, and that the only way to win was to understand those rules better than the people who'd written them. "Emma," he said slowly, testing the waters, "what if I told you that I once had $4.3 billion and lost every penny of it by signing a piece of paper I didn't properly understand?" Emma stopped organizing the contents of her purse and looked at him with sharp, sudden focus. Her entire demeanor changed in an instant, shifting from polite child to something far more dangerous and perceptive. "I'd say you're either lying to make yourself sound more interesting," she replied with startling directness, "or you're Marcus Wellington, and you got completely played by Blackstone Industries exactly 3 weeks and 2 days ago." The blood drained from Marcus's face so quickly he felt lightheaded. "How in God's name could you possibly know about that?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. His heart was hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. Emma shrugged, as if discussing billion-dollar corporate takeovers was perfectly normal conversation for an 8-year-old having dinner in a pizza joint. "I read everything I can get my hands on. Business sections of newspapers that rich people throw away without even opening, financial magazines in the public library, legal documents and contracts that Mama's employers leave lying around their offices and studies." Marcus stared at this small girl who had just casually referenced his most devastating failure, a failure he'd assumed was buried under layers of corporate secrecy, non-disclosure agreements, and legal confidentiality clauses that cost millions to enforce. "Most people don't know the specific details of what happened to me," he said carefully, testing her knowledge. The official press releases were very carefully worded to make it sound like a standard acquisition. "Most people don't know how to read between the lines of corporate speak," Emma replied with the confidence of someone much older. She pulled a small, worn notebook from her purse and flipped through pages covered in neat handwriting. The news reports said Blackstone Industries acquired Wellington Technologies in a mutually beneficial strategic partnership. But the timing was completely wrong. The stock price movement was suspicious, and the language they used was classic distressed acquisition terminology. Marcus felt his mouth go completely dry. "What else do you think you know about my situation? I think you signed something you shouldn't have signed, because you were desperate and scared and backed into a corner with no good options." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical in its assessment. "I think Blackstone played a really long game to put you in exactly that position, probably for years, before they made their move. And I think there's probably a way out of your contract that nobody's found yet, because all the lawyers and financial experts are thinking like lawyers and financial experts instead of thinking like—" She gestured to herself with a slight smile. "Like an 8-year-old?" Marcus asked, not sure whether to laugh or cry. "Like someone who's had to survive by being smarter than people who automatically underestimate her because of how she looks or where she comes from?" Emma's eyes held a fire that Marcus recognized from his own reflection 20 years ago, the burning determination of someone who refused to accept the limitations the world tried to impose. "Do you want to know what I think might be wrong with your contract?" Marcus laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in 3 weeks. The sound was bitter and broken, tinged with hysteria, but it was still genuine laughter. "Sure, sweetheart, please enlighten me about my billion-dollar mistake." Emma reached into her notebook and pulled out a carefully folded section of newspaper, the financial pages of the Wall Street Journal from 2 days earlier. There, buried on page C7, in a small article that most people would skip right over, was a report about Blackstone Industries facing increased scrutiny from the Federal Trade Commission for potential antitrust violations in 3 separate major acquisitions over the past 5 years. "Your contract almost certainly contains what corporate lawyers call a material adverse change clause," Emma said with the casual confidence of someone discussing the weather. If Blackstone gets broken up by federal regulators, or if they're found to have committed fraud or concealment during the acquisition process, the entire deal could potentially be voided and unwound. Marcus grabbed the newspaper with shaking hands, scanning the article with growing amazement. The dates mentioned in the FTC investigation lined up almost perfectly with his own contract timeline. His legal training from Harvard, rusty from decades of focusing on technology instead of law, began to kick in as he processed the implications. "Emma," he whispered, hardly daring to hope, "where on earth did you learn to think like this? This is graduate-level corporate law and federal regulatory theory." The little girl smiled for the first time since she'd entered the restaurant, and it transformed her entire face. "Poverty is the best business school in the world, Mr. Wellington. When you have no safety net and no second chances, you learn to think really, really fast. This is absolutely impossible," Marcus breathed, staring at the newspaper article like it contained the secrets of the universe. "You're 8 years old, Emma. You cannot possibly understand corporate law, federal antitrust regulations, and complex contract structures well enough to identify potential legal loopholes that teams of expensive lawyers missed." Emma's smile faded, replaced by the deadly serious expression of someone far older than her chronological years. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that seemed impossible coming from someone so young. "Mr. Wellington, do you want to know the real reason I can read and understand these documents when most adults can't? It's because when your mama works 16-hour days for $2 an hour, and you're left alone in rich people's houses while she cleans their bathrooms and scrubs their floors, you learn to entertain yourself in whatever ways you can find." She pulled out her small notebook again, worn from constant use and filled with careful handwriting in different colored pens. "Those rich people whose houses mama cleans, they leave their business magazines lying around like they're worthless. They leave confidential legal documents on their desks and kitchen counters. They take important phone calls right in front of us because they never think the cleaning lady's kid might actually be listening and understanding every word." Marcus flipped through the notebook with growing amazement and horror. Page after page of meticulous notes about stock option structures, patent law intricacies, corporate governance frameworks, merger and acquisition strategies, all written in the careful handwriting of a child, but containing insights that would make Harvard Business School professors weep with envy. "For almost 3 years now, I've been copying down every interesting thing I see or hear in these houses," Emma continued. "Contract language, business strategies, legal loopholes, financial structures. I've been teaching myself how the really wealthy people stay wealthy and why people like Mama and me stay poor no matter how hard we work." "Emma, this is extraordinary," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "But you said you could help me reverse my contract situation. How is that even theoretically possible?" Emma's dark eyes lit up with the unmistakable excitement of someone finally being asked to reveal their greatest discovery. "Because I was there when they planned it, Mr. Wellington. I was actually there." "What do you mean you were there?" 3 weeks ago, the night you signed your contract, Mama was working late at the Blackstone Industries Executive Building downtown. She cleans the offices on the 42nd floor, including Mr. Harrison's corner office. He's their chief legal counsel, the man who designed your contract. Emma's voice dropped to an intense whisper. "I was with her that night because it was too late to leave me alone at home, and I heard them talking about you, about their whole plan." Marcus felt the world tilt sideways around him. "You heard them discussing my acquisition?" "I heard everything," Emma said with quiet intensity. "How they'd been planning your downfall for almost 2 years. How they planted negative stories about Wellington Technologies' financial stability in trade publications. How they bribed one of your board members, Mr. Richard Ashworth, to create internal pressure for a quick sale. How they deliberately timed market pressures to coincide with your personal vulnerabilities." Emma reached deeper into her notebook and pulled out what looked like a photocopy of an internal document. And while Mama was cleaning the bathrooms, I used their copy machine to make copies of documents they'd left on the conference room table. Marcus unfolded the paper with trembling hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was an internal Blackstone strategy document titled Project Wellington, Phase 3, Acquisition Completion. The contents made his blood run cold and his vision blur with rage. Every single pressure point they'd used against him was laid out in clinical, methodical detail. Every financial crisis that had driven him to desperation had been carefully orchestrated months in advance. Every supposed coincidence had been planned with surgical precision. They hadn't just taken advantage of his desperation, they had created it systematically, like scientists conducting an experiment on a laboratory rat. But at the bottom of the page, highlighted in yellow marker, was something even more damning. A timeline clearly showing that Blackstone had known about their pending FTC antitrust investigation, a full 6 months before they'd approached him with their acquisition offer. They had deliberately concealed material information that would have fundamentally changed his decision to sign. "Emma," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking with a combination of rage and hope he hadn't felt in weeks. "Do you understand what this document represents? This proves fraudulent concealment, market manipulation, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. This could void my entire contract and put half of Blackstone's executive team in prison." The little girl grinned with the satisfaction of someone who'd just delivered the perfect checkmate move. "I was really hoping you'd say that, Mr. Wellington. Now, do you want to hear my business proposal?" Emma leaned forward across the grimy table, her 8-year-old face wearing an expression of calculating intensity that would have been unsettling on a Fortune 500 CEO, let alone a child who should have been worried about homework and playground politics. "Here's my proposal, Mr. Wellington," she said, with the quiet confidence of someone who had thought through every possible angle. "You use my information and evidence to break your contract with Blackstone and reclaim control of Wellington Technologies. In exchange, you make me the youngest chief executive officer in American corporate history." Marcus nearly choked on the sip of coffee he'd just taken, coughing so hard that other diners turned to stare. "Emma, you're 8 years old. You can't legally sign contracts, vote, drive, or even stay home alone in most states. There's absolutely no way you could legally serve as a CEO of a major corporation." "You're absolutely right. I can't legally be CEO right now," she interrupted, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a slow student. "But I can legally serve as your senior strategic consultant and chief advisor. And when I turn 18 in exactly 10 years, you transfer majority ownership of the company to me through a carefully structured succession plan." Her eyes burned with an ambition that would have been genuinely frightening in an adult, let alone a child. 10 years, Mr. Wellington. 10 years of me working beside you every single day, learning every aspect of the business, studying every industry trend, preparing to take over when I'm legally old enough. And you never have to worry about being betrayed or manipulated again, because everything I achieve will be built on the foundation you give me. I'll owe my entire future to your decision to trust me." Marcus stared at this incredible child, his mind reeling from the sheer audacity of what she was proposing. The idea was insane, legally questionable, practically impossible, and yet there was something about her absolute certainty that made it seem almost reasonable. "Emma, why would you want this kind of responsibility? Most children your age dream about toys and games and summer vacations, not running multinational corporations and dealing with shareholders and regulatory compliance." Emma's voice grew soft and vulnerable for the first time since she'd sat down, revealing the hurt child beneath the calculating business mind. "Because right now, at this exact moment, my mama is on her hands and knees in some rich woman's marble bathroom, scrubbing toilet bowls for $2 an hour. She's been working since 5 o'clock this morning, and she won't get home until after midnight. She'll fall asleep in her uniform because she's too exhausted to change clothes." Tears gathered in the little girl's dark eyes, but her voice remained absolutely steady. My mama is 26 years old, Mr. Wellington. She should be designing skyscrapers or teaching advanced mathematics at a university or running her own engineering firm. She has a brilliant mind that could change the world. Instead, she's invisible. People look right through her like she doesn't exist, like she doesn't matter, like her intelligence and her dreams are worthless because she cleans their houses. The raw pain in Emma's voice cut through Marcus like a knife. He recognized something in her expression, the same desperate hunger he'd felt as a young man sleeping in his car, the burning need to prove that the circumstances of your birth didn't have to determine the trajectory of your entire life. I want to build something so massive, so powerful, so undeniably successful that no one will ever be able to make my mama feel small again. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. And I want to do it legitimately, brilliantly, so that when people see Maria Rodriguez's daughter, they don't see some poor Hispanic girl who got lucky or slept her way to the top. They see the smartest, most capable businesswoman in the world who happened to be born into poverty but refused to let that define her limits. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, a recognition of shared pain. Shared ambition, shared determination to rewrite the story the world had written for them. "And if I refuse your proposal?" he asked quietly. Emma's vulnerability disappeared instantly, replaced by cold calculation. "Then you go back to your one-room apartment in Queens, eating discount pizza and feeling sorry for yourself while Blackstone Industries systematically destroys every trace of the empire you spent your life building. Your technology gets buried, your employees get fired, and your name becomes a cautionary tale about business failure." Her voice hardened with absolute certainty. "And I go back to watching my brilliant, beautiful mama destroy her body and her spirit for people who wouldn't notice if she disappeared tomorrow. We both lose everything, and powerful people who don't deserve their power keep winning." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the impossible documents Emma had shown him, thinking about the sheer audacity and potential brilliance of what she was suggesting. The partnership she was proposing would be unlike anything in corporate history. A disgraced billionaire and a child genius taking on one of the most powerful companies in America. "You understand," he said slowly, "that if we do this, it won't just be about getting my company back. We'll be declaring war on some of the most ruthless, well-connected, politically protected people in the country. They have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. They'll try to destroy both of us completely." Emma smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw not just intelligence in her expression, but something far more dangerous, the absolute fearlessness of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Mr. Wellington," she said, extending her small hand across the stained table, "I've been at war with powerful people my entire life. The only difference is that now I'll finally have real weapons to fight back with instead of just dreams and anger." Marcus looked at her outstretched hand, then at her determined face, then at the impossible future she was offering him, a future where his greatest mistake might become his greatest victory. Guided by an 8-year-old genius who understood the game of power better than players with decades more experience. He reached across the table and grasped her small hand in his much larger one. "Partners," he said solemnly. "Partners," Emma agreed, her smile blazing with triumph. "Now let's go save your empire and build mine." The law office of Chen, Martinez and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a modest building in Midtown Manhattan, a far cry from the gleaming corporate towers Marcus was accustomed to. But David Chen had been his personal attorney for 12 years and one of the few people who hadn't abandoned him after the Blackstone disaster. "Marcus, this is absolutely insane," David said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he stared at the documents Emma had spread across his mahogany conference table. "You're telling me an 8-year-old girl obtained classified internal documents from Blackstone Industries?" "I'm telling you, she has evidence that could destroy them," Marcus replied, watching Emma organize her materials with the precision of a seasoned paralegal. 3 days had passed since their partnership began, and he was still struggling to process the reality of working with a child genius. Emma looked up from her documents with the patient expression of someone dealing with particularly slow adults. Mr. Chen, with respect, the how is less important than the what. These documents prove that Blackstone deliberately concealed material information about their FTC investigation. That constitutes fraudulent inducement, which voids the contract under New York corporate law. David's mouth fell open slightly. How do you know New York corporate law? I read the Business Corporation Law sections 623 through 717 last month at the library, Emma said matter-of-factly. The precedent case is Morrison Industries versus Hartwell Financial, decided by the New York Court of Appeals in 2019. Similar fact pattern, undisclosed regulatory investigation during acquisition negotiations. Marcus watched David's expression shift from skepticism to amazement to something approaching fear. As a Harvard law graduate with 25 years of practice, David was witnessing an 8-year-old demonstrate legal knowledge that surpassed most junior associates. Even if these documents are authentic, David said slowly, Blackstone has unlimited resources and the best legal team money can buy. Harrison Mitchell is their general counsel. He's never lost a major corporate litigation in 15 years. They'll claim the documents are fabricated, question how they were obtained, and bury us in motions and appeals for decades. Emma smiled with quiet confidence. That's why we're not going to court first, Mr. Chen. We're going to the media. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Emma, we agreed to be careful. We're going to be very careful, she interrupted. But we need public pressure to force Blackstone's hand. Corporate fraud is only effective when it happens in the shadows. Once their tactics are exposed, their stock price will crash and their other acquisition targets will run for cover. She pulled out another document, a typed list of names that made Marcus's blood run cold. These are the investigative journalists who've been tracking Blackstone's questionable practices for years. Sarah Martinez at the Financial Herald, Jonathan Wright at Corporate Watchdog, Rebecca Chen at the Wall Street Tribune. They've been waiting for smoking gun evidence like this. David leaned back in his chair, his expression a mixture of admiration and terror. This child is proposing to wage economic warfare against one of the most powerful corporations in America. This child is proposing to expose criminals who think they're untouchable, Emma corrected firmly. Mr. Wellington, in 48 hours, I need you to call Sarah Martinez and offer her the exclusive story. But first, we need insurance. What kind of insurance? Marcus asked. Though he suspected, he didn't want to know the answer. Emma's eyes glittered with strategic brilliance. We need copies of these documents in the hands of people Blackstone can't touch. International journalists, overseas financial regulators, foreign competitors who would love to see Blackstone weakened. If they try to silence us, the story explodes globally. Marcus stared at this remarkable child who was calmly planning the destruction of a corporate empire with the same thoughtful precision most kids applied to video games. Emma, if we do this, there's no going back. They'll come after us with everything they have. Good, Emma said with fierce satisfaction. I've been invisible my whole life. Mr. Wellington, it's time they noticed me. David gathered the documents with shaking hands. I need 24 hours to verify the authenticity of these papers and research the legal implications. If you're really going to war with Blackstone, we need to be bulletproof. As they prepared to leave, Emma turned to Marcus with an expression of absolute determination. Tomorrow, we start taking back everything they stole from you, and then we start building something they never saw coming. Marcus nodded, feeling equal parts terrified and exhilarated. The quiet 8-year-old who'd asked for pizza scraps was revealing herself to be a strategic mastermind with nerves of steel. The war for his empire was about to begin. The Financial Herald's newsroom buzzed with typical Wednesday afternoon chaos, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, reporters shouting questions across cubicles. Sarah Martinez sat at her desk reviewing quarterly earnings reports when her secure phone line rang with the distinctive tone reserved for confidential sources. Martinez, she answered curtly. Miss Martinez, my name is Marcus Wellington. I believe you've been investigating Blackstone Industries' acquisition practices. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. Marcus Wellington, the fallen tech billionaire whose spectacular downfall had been front-page news for weeks. Mr. Wellington, I'm surprised to hear from you. Most sources assume you're in hiding. I'm ready to talk, Marcus said, but not over the phone, and I'm bringing someone you need to meet. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a private booth at Delancey's Deli on the Lower East Side, studying the most unlikely pair she'd ever interviewed. Marcus Wellington looked haggard, but determined, while the small Hispanic girl beside him appeared to be organizing documents with the efficiency of a seasoned investigative reporter. This is Emma Rodriguez, Marcus explained. She's my consultant, Sarah raised an eyebrow. Your consultant is 8 years old. My consultant has evidence that will bring down Blackstone Industries, Marcus replied. Emma, show her what you showed me. Emma slid a manila folder across the table with the confidence of someone delivering state secrets. Ms. Martinez, these documents prove that Blackstone engaged in systematic fraud during their acquisition of Wellington Technologies. They concealed material information about federal investigations, manipulated market conditions, and bribed corporate insiders. Sarah opened the folder and felt her journalistic instincts ignite. The documents were explosive: internal memos detailing corporate espionage, financial records showing suspicious payments to Wellington board members, and timeline evidence of deliberate market manipulation. How did you obtain these? Sarah asked carefully. My mama cleans Blackstone's executive offices, Emma replied matter-of-factly. Rich people leave important papers lying around because they never think the cleaning lady's daughter might be reading them. Sarah studied Emma with growing fascination. The child spoke with the vocabulary and confidence of someone far beyond her years, organizing evidence with practiced skill. Do you understand what these documents mean? They mean Blackstone Industries is about to face the biggest corporate scandal in a decade, Emma replied calmly. They mean Marcus gets his company back, their stock price crashes, and other companies they've bullied finally have the evidence to fight back. Sarah felt the familiar thrill of a major story breaking. This is Pulitzer Prize-level investigative journalism, but Blackstone will claim these documents are fabricated. They'll question the source, challenge authenticity, and probably sue everyone involved. Which is why we're not just talking to you, Emma said, producing another folder. Copies of these documents are being delivered simultaneously to the Wall Street Tribune, Corporate Watchdog, and 3 international financial publications. If Blackstone tries to suppress the story in America, it goes global. Marcus watched Sarah's expression shift from skepticism to amazement. She's thought of everything. Sarah, legal angles, media strategy, international exposure. She's 8 years old, and she's planning corporate warfare like a seasoned strategist. Emma leaned forward with intense focus. Miss Martinez, Blackstone has been systematically destroying smaller companies for years. Wellington Technologies is just their latest victim, but if we expose their methods now, we can stop them before they ruin anyone else. Sarah closed the folder, her mind racing with the implications. If I run this story, it will be the biggest financial scandal of the year. But it will also make both of you the most hunted people in corporate America. We're already being hunted, Marcus replied grimly. The difference is that now we're hunting back. Emma smiled with quiet determination. The story runs tomorrow morning, Ms. Martinez. By noon, every financial market in the world will know what Blackstone Industries really is. Sarah nodded, recognizing the birth of a legend. An 8-year-old girl was about to take down one of America's most powerful corporations, and she was going to have front-row seats to the destruction. The war had officially begun. The story hit the financial markets like a nuclear bomb at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sarah Martinez's exclusive investigation, titled The Blackstone files, how corporate giants manufacture desperation, dominated every business news outlet within hours. Marcus sat in his cramped Queens apartment, watching CNBC's coverage with Emma perched beside him on his salvaged couch, both of them mesmerized by the unfolding chaos they had orchestrated. Blackstone Industries' stock has plummeted 37% in pre-market trading, the anchor reported, his voice tight with excitement. The Financial Herald's bombshell investigation alleges systematic corporate fraud, market manipulation and bribery in the acquisition of Wellington Technologies. Federal investigators are already... Marcus's phone rang incessantly. Reporters, lawyers, former colleagues who'd ignored him for weeks, suddenly desperate to reconnect. Emma had insisted they ignore all calls until the initial media storm reached its peak. Phase 1 complete, Emma said with satisfaction, making notes in her ever-present notebook. Blackstone's credibility is destroyed, their stock is crashing, and every acquisition target they've been pursuing will now run for cover. This is incredible, Emma, but you know they'll retaliate. Harrison Mitchell doesn't lose quietly. As if summoned by his words, the apartment building's buzzer rang with sharp insistence. Marcus checked his security monitor and saw 3 men in expensive suits standing at his front door, unmistakably corporate lawyers. "Mr. Wellington," a voice crackled through the intercom. "This is Harrison Mitchell, General Counsel for Blackstone Industries. We need to discuss the stolen documents your associate leaked to the press." Emma moved to the window and peered down at the black SUVs lined up on the street. 6 vehicles, at least 15 people. They brought serious muscle. Marcus felt his heart rate spike. They can't legally force entry without a warrant. "They don't need to force entry," Emma said calmly, pulling out her phone. "Mr. Wellington, do you trust me completely?" "Emma, what are you... Do you trust me?" she repeated urgently. "Yes, but..." Emma dialed a number with practiced efficiency. "Ms. Martinez, this is Emma Rodriguez. Blackstone just arrived at Mr. Wellington's apartment with what looks like a private security team. I think you'll want to send photographers." "Yes, I'll keep the line open so you can record everything." She handed Marcus the phone, then walked to the intercom with the fearless stride of someone who had nothing to lose. "Mr. Mitchell," she said clearly, "this is Emma Rodriguez, Mr. Wellington's strategic consultant. I'm 8 years old, and I'm the person who exposed your criminal conspiracy to the world." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "I want to speak with Marcus Wellington immediately." Mitchell's voice finally crackled back, tighter with barely controlled rage. "Mr. Wellington doesn't negotiate with criminals," Emma replied cheerfully. "But I'll make you a deal. You have exactly 60 seconds to remove your intimidation squad from this building before I call the police and report corporate harassment of a minor." The Financial Herald is recording this conversation, by the way. Smile for the cameras, Mr. Mitchell. Marcus watched through the window as photographers emerged from unmarked vans, clearly tipped off by Sarah Martinez. The Blackstone legal team found themselves surrounded by journalists documenting their heavy-handed tactics. Mitchell's voice returned, cold with fury. "This isn't over, little girl." Emma's response was delivered with the icy calm of a seasoned negotiator. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Mitchell. It's not over. It's just beginning. Tomorrow morning, phase 2 of my plan goes into effect. I suggest you use tonight to prepare your resignation letter." She disconnected the intercom and turned to Marcus with a triumphant smile. "And that, Mr. Wellington, is how you turn a threat into a public relations disaster. By tomorrow, every news outlet in America will be running stories about Blackstone Industries sending armed intimidation squads to threaten an 8-year-old girl." Marcus stared at her in amazement. "Phase 2? What's phase 2? Emma's smile turned predatory. "Tomorrow, we file the lawsuit that will give you back everything they stole. And then we start building the empire that will make Blackstone Industries look like a corner convenience store." Outside, the Blackstone vehicles retreated in humiliating defeat, followed by a parade of news vans, hungry for the next chapter of the story. The war was escalating exactly as Emma had planned. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan buzzed with unprecedented media attention as Marcus and Emma arrived for what legal experts were calling the most audacious corporate lawsuit of the decade. Emma wore her best dress, still clearly second-hand but pressed with military precision, and carried a briefcase that looked comically large in her small hands. David Chen met them at the courthouse steps, his expression a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "Marcus, the media circus is insane. Every major network has crews here. Blackstone brought 17 lawyers. How many did we bring?" Emma asked calmly. 3, counting myself." Emma smiled with quiet confidence. "Perfect. David facing Goliath always makes better television." Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed with reporters, financial analysts, and curious observers drawn by the spectacle of an 8-year-old taking on corporate America. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a no-nonsense jurist with 30 years on the bench, called the proceedings to order with visible skepticism about the circus atmosphere. Harrison Mitchell stood to address the court, his silver hair and $5,000 suit projecting corporate authority. "Your Honor, this frivolous lawsuit is based on stolen documents obtained through criminal trespass by a minor. We move for immediate dismissal." Emma tugged on David's sleeve and whispered something urgently. David nodded and rose to respond. "Your Honor, our evidence was obtained by a child who observed criminal activity and reported it to appropriate authorities." "The whistleblower protection statutes." "Objection," Mitchell interrupted smoothly. 8-year-olds cannot be legal whistleblowers. This child lacks the capacity to understand the significance of the documents she allegedly found. Judge Hendricks looked directly at Emma, who had been sitting quietly beside Marcus, with the composed attention of someone following complex legal arguments. "Young lady, do you understand why you're in this courtroom today?" Emma stood with perfect posture, her voice clear and confident. "Yes, Your Honor. We're here because Blackstone Industries committed fraud when they acquired Mr. Wellington's company. They hid the fact that federal investigators were examining their business practices. They manipulated market conditions to force a desperate sale. And they bribed corporate insiders to pressure Mr. Wellington into signing a contract he couldn't properly evaluate." The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Hendricks leaned forward with sharp interest. "And how do you know these things, Miss Rodriguez?" "Because I was present when they discussed their illegal activities." "Your Honor, my mother cleans their offices and I heard them planning Mr. Wellington's destruction in detail. I also photocopied documents that prove everything I just described." Harrison Mitchell's face had gone pale. "Your Honor, we object to testimony from a minor who—" "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Hendricks interrupted coldly, "this child appears to understand the issues better than half the lawyers in my courtroom." "Continue, Miss Rodriguez." Emma pulled documents from her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Your Honor, these internal Blackstone memos prove they knew about the FTC investigation 6 months before approaching Mr. Wellington. They deliberately concealed material information to induce fraudulent acceptance of their contract terms." Judge Hendricks examined the documents with growing amazement. "Miss Rodriguez, did you organize this evidence yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've been studying corporate law and federal regulations for 3 years. Blackstone's fraud follows a clear pattern they've used against 12 other companies since 2019. Marcus watched the judge's expression shift from skepticism to fascination to barely concealed outrage as she reviewed Emma's evidence. The courtroom remained pin-drop silent, every person present witnessing legal history in the making. "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Hendricks said finally, "I'm scheduling an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. Bring every executive who signed these memos. And Mr. Mitchell, I suggest you prepare explanations for what appears to be systematic corporate fraud." As they left the courthouse, Emma looked up at Marcus with quiet satisfaction. "Phase 3 complete. Tomorrow they start returning everything they stole from you." Marcus shook his head in wonder. "Emma, I think you just became the youngest person in American history to expose a major corporate conspiracy." Emma's smile was fierce with triumph. And we're just getting started, Mr. Wellington, just getting started. The emergency hearing convened at 9 a.m. sharp, but the Blackstone Industries delegation looked like they'd been awake all night. Harrison Mitchell's usual corporate confidence had evaporated, replaced by the haunted expression of a man watching his career disintegrate in real time. Emma sat between Marcus and David Chen, her small notebook open and ready, looking like she was preparing for a particularly challenging final exam rather than the culmination of a billion-dollar legal battle. Judge Hendricks entered the courtroom with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent the evening reviewing federal fraud statutes. "Mr. Mitchell, I've had 14 hours to examine the evidence presented by Miss Rodriguez. I have questions." Mitchell stood unsteadily. "Your Honor, we maintain that these documents were obtained illegally." "Mr. Mitchell," the judge interrupted sharply, "I'm less concerned with how these documents were obtained than with their contents. Specifically, I want explanations for the internal memo dated March 15th, detailing plans to create market instability around Wellington Technologies, and the payment authorization for $2.3 million to board member Richard Ashworth." The gallery buzzed with excitement as reporters frantically took notes. Emma watched Harrison Mitchell's composure crumble completely. "Your Honor, that memo was taken out of context. What context makes corporate sabotage and bribery acceptable?" "Mr. Mitchell," Judge Hendricks' voice carried the cold authority of someone who'd presided over white-collar criminal cases for decades. Emma tugged David's sleeve again. Whispering urgently, David nodded and stood. "Your Honor, we have additional evidence that came to light overnight. Miss Rodriguez discovered electronic communications between Blackstone executives and offshore accounts used to fund their market manipulation activities." Emma stood and addressed the court directly. "Your Honor, I spent last night at the public library researching Blackstone's financial disclosures. Their SEC filings contain inconsistencies that suggest they've been using these same illegal tactics against multiple acquisition targets." Judge Hendricks stared at Emma with undisguised amazement. "Miss Rodriguez, did you conduct this analysis yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor. I cross-referenced their quarterly reports with federal investigation timelines and found 17 separate instances where they concealed regulatory scrutiny during active acquisition negotiations." The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations as the full scope of Emma's discoveries became clear. She wasn't just exposing the Wellington Technologies fraud. She was revealing a systematic pattern of corporate criminality spanning years. Harrison Mitchell slumped in his chair like a man watching his entire world collapse. Judge Hendricks called for order, then delivered her ruling with crystal-clear precision. "Based on the evidence presented, I find clear and convincing proof of fraudulent inducement, material concealment, and conspiracy to manipulate market conditions. The Blackstone Wellington Technologies acquisition contract is hereby declared null and void. All assets, patents, and corporate control are to be immediately returned to Mr. Wellington." Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief and disbelief. Emma simply smiled with quiet satisfaction, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. "Furthermore," Judge Hendricks continued, "I'm referring this matter to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for criminal prosecution. Mr. Mitchell, your clients have 48 hours to comply with asset restoration or face contempt of court charges." As they left the courthouse steps, Emma looked up at Marcus with the triumphant expression of someone who just changed the course of history. "Phase 4 complete," she said calmly. "Tomorrow, you start rebuilding your empire, and next week I start learning how to run it." Marcus laughed with pure joy for the first time in months. "Emma, you've just pulled off the most spectacular corporate comeback in American business history." Emma's smile blazed with determination. "Mr. Wellington, we haven't even started fighting yet. Wait until you see what I have planned for Phase 5. 6 months later, Marcus stood in his restored corner office on the 45th floor of the Wellington Technologies building. watching Emma explain advanced AI algorithms to a room full of MIT computer science professors via video conference. At 9 years old, she had become the youngest strategic consultant in corporate history and was already being courted by universities eager to study her unprecedented intellectual development. "The breakthrough isn't in the processing speed," Emma was saying, her child's voice carrying the authority of someone who'd revolutionized artificial intelligence theory. "It's in the ethical framework integration. Current AI systems lack contextual empathy protocols." Marcus shook his head in continued amazement. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of impossible achievements. Wellington Technologies had not only recovered from the Blackstone attack, but had emerged stronger than ever. Emma's insights had led to 3 revolutionary patent applications, and their stock price had tripled as investors recognized they possessed something unprecedented, a genuine prodigy with business instincts that defied explanation. The door opened, and Maria Rodriguez entered carrying coffee and wearing the professional attire of Wellington Technologies' new Director of Operations, a position Emma had insisted her mother deserved after reviewing her Colombian engineering credentials. "How's our resident genius today?" Maria asked, watching her daughter casually solve problems that had stumped seasoned researchers for months. "She's planning to revolutionize 3 more industries before lunch," Marcus replied. "Yesterday, she suggested modifications to our supply chain that will save us $50 million annually. This morning, she designed a new employee benefits program that human resources called impossibly generous but mathematically sound." Emma finished her conference call and turned to them with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just taught calculus to kindergartners. "The MIT professors want to offer me early admission when I turn 12. I told them I'm too busy building an empire." Marcus laughed. The partnership that had begun in a pizza restaurant had transformed both their lives beyond recognition. Emma had kept her promise. She'd helped him reclaim everything Blackstone had stolen, and then elevated Wellington Technologies to heights he'd never imagined possible. "Speaking of building empires," Emma said, pulling out her ever-present notebook, "I've been thinking about our expansion into renewable energy technologies. I have some ideas about solar panel efficiency that could revolutionize the entire industry." Maria looked at Marcus with the bemused expression of a mother whose child regularly redefined the limits of human achievement. "Sometimes I wonder if she's actually my daughter or some kind of business-minded alien who decided to adopt me." Emma grinned with the pure joy of a child who'd found her calling. "Mama, you're stuck with me for at least 9 more years. By then, we'll own half of Fortune 500. Marcus gazed out at the Manhattan skyline, thinking about the impossible journey that had brought them here. A year ago, he'd been a broken billionaire eating cold pizza and contemplating bankruptcy. Today, he was the CEO of one of America's fastest-growing technology companies, guided by a 10-year-old strategic partner whose intellectual capabilities seemed to expand daily. "Emma," he said quietly, "do you ever miss being a normal kid? Playing with toys, watching cartoons, worrying about homework instead of corporate governance?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Mr. Wellington, some people are born to play with toys. Other people are born to build the companies that make the toys. I know exactly what I am." She walked to the window and looked out at the city, stretching endlessly below them. A city full of dreamers and schemers, winners and losers, all struggling to write their own stories of success and failure. "Besides," Emma added with a smile that held all the confidence in the world, "I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm 18, Wellington Technologies is going to be the most powerful company on Earth. And every little girl who gets told she's too young, too poor, or too different is going to know that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet." Marcus nodded, watching his extraordinary partner plan their extraordinary future. The 8-year-old girl who'd asked for pizza scraps had become the architect of the most remarkable corporate transformation in modern history. And she was absolutely right. They were just getting started. The empire Emma Rodriguez was building would reshape not just business, but the very definition of what was possible when brilliance met opportunity and refused to accept the limitations the world tried to impose. In the end, Marcus realized he hadn't just recovered from his billion-dollar mistake. He'd discovered that sometimes the most catastrophic failures create space for the most extraordinary successes. And sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected packages, like a brilliant little girl who sees possibilities where everyone else sees only problems. Their story was far from over. In fact, Marcus suspected it was just beginning.